The Legend of Zelda was created by Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka in 1986. The idea for the game was inspired by Miyamoto's adventures as a child. As a young boy, he spent most of his days exploring the countryside surrounding his home, and one day he found a large cave in the middle of the woods. He went back to his house, acquired a lantern, and after building up the courage to do so, he ventured into the cave. Miyamoto said that the sense of excitement and wonder he felt that day was something he wanted to recreate in a video game, and thus The Legend of Zelda was born. Why Zelda? Why isn't the franchise called simply The Adventures of Link, like the subtitle of the second installment? I mean, there's a reason why so many people confuse this guy for being Zelda. After all, this green dude is the most iconic thing about the games. Well, when the first game was released in Japan in 1986, it was actually titled The Hyrule Fantasy, with Legend of Zelda being a subtitle. It seems like a much more fitting title, doesn't it? The games are a lot more about exploring the world of Hyrule than about Zelda, but for the North American release, the game was for unknown reasons renamed to simply The Legend of Zelda, and ever since it's been in the title of every Zelda game. "It's dangerous to go alone" is at least one of the most memorable quotes in gaming history, which makes it even more surprising that this scene almost didn't make it into the game. Early in development of the first Zelda game, players would actually begin with a sword in hand. However, when Nintendo tested the game before release, most players complained that the game was too confusing and that they kept getting lost. Rather than fixing the game, Miyamoto insisted on making the game even more complex and confusing, including starting the player off without any means to defend themselves. His logic was that making Zelda more confusing would force kids to share information with their friends and foster a sense of community around the game. And seeing as we're still talking about it, I'd say it worked. Movies based on video games usually aren't that well received. Still, we continue to wish and hope that someone will make a good movie about our favorite franchise, and Zelda is no exception. While there have been unconfirmed rumors about a live-action Zelda movie for decades now, a leaked video from 2007 reveals that Imagi Studios pitched the idea of an animated movie to Nintendo. However, seeing as the movie never got made, we can only assume that Nintendo was afraid of this happening again. Early in development, Miyamoto planned for the first game to also take place in the future. And when I say the future, I mean a very futuristic, high-tech sci-fi type future. This is also why Link is named Link. He was supposed to serve as a link between the past and the future. Miyamoto has also stated that his green clothes and overall design were inspired by Disney's version of Peter Pan, and the similarities are awfully similar. Except for the hair color, they look almost exactly the same. Neither of them age or have any parents, and both of them have a flying magical companion with wings. The noises the choo-choos make in The Wind Waker is actually a sped-up clip of two men arguing in Japanese. While working on Ocarina of Time, Miyamoto had the idea of making the game in a first-person perspective. The camera would only go into a third-person mode when confronting an enemy. However, director Yoshiaki Koizumi, who also designed the 3D model for Link, disliked the idea and wanted Link to be visible at all times. He, along with others, managed to convince Miyamoto of this, and thus a third person was chosen instead. But if you're still curious what the game would look like in first person as well as on the Oculus Rift, the modding community got you covered. In fact, you can even play the original The Legend of Zelda, yes, the top-down 2D game, in 3D first person. In The Legend of Zelda, the first 5 dungeons of the second quest spell out the name Zelda. On a similar note, the third dungeon in the first quest looks like this. But it's not what you think. In Japanese, this is a symbol of good fortune called manji. It's also facing the other direction compared to the Nazi symbol. The most iconic Zelda theme of them all, this one. Almost never happened. In the beginning, Nintendo planned on using a famous orchestral piece titled Bolero. However, at the last minute they realized that the song was still copyrighted, and thus composer Koji Kondo had to write a new theme song for the game, and he did it in one single day. For many years, in fact many decades, fans have wondered and theorized about the timeline of events in the games. Was every release just a sequel, a continuation of a larger story? Or maybe some installments were prequels, or maybe even completely separate games with little or no connection to the rest? The events in the game certainly spoke for the latter. It couldn't be one continuous story, it just didn't make any sense that way. In the meantime, Nintendo repeatedly stated that there was indeed an encompassing timeline explaining the connection between all the games, but they never revealed it. That is until 2011, when Nintendo released the book Hyrule Historia. For the first time, the story or stories behind the Legend of Zelda was explained. The reason fans had been unable to crack the code, so to speak, was because there wasn't one simple timeline. Instead, after the events in Ocarina of Time, the timeline split into three. It would take too long to go through all of it, but let's run down some of the major events. The story of the Legend of Zelda begins with Skyward Sword. In the game, Link and Zelda established the Kingdom of Hyrule, which laid the foundation for the rest of the franchise. Later on, the events of the Minish Cap and Four Swords took place. Now we reach the game that complicated everything: Ocarina of Time. Near the end of the game, there's a final battle between Link and Ganon. If you play the game, you know that Ganon is defeated. We are the hero who saved the Princess Zelda and the Kingdom of Hyrule. Now, according to Nintendo and Hyrule Historia, there's also a timeline in which Link is actually defeated during the final battle with Ganon. Ganon goes on to acquire the Triforce, and a war soon breaks out. This creates the first timeline called the Decline of Hyrule. It's basically the dark or evil version of the story. The other two timelines were created at the very end of the game, when Zelda sends Link back in time. So there's one timeline for the Link who was sent back in time, and one for the Link who stayed behind. They're simply referred to as the child and adult Link timeline. Not confusing at all.